hello, good morning, and welcome to Journey to SEA 2025. This is Shelley Edwards Barron, your creative writing specialist, here to talk things about reports, narratives, and comprehension. Thank you so much for joining me. We're starting a little bit after 11 this morning, but we are here and excited to go. I hope I am, because today we're actually going to be doing I guess we can call it a little extension to what we've been doing so far, because one of the things that I recognize is that we sometimes, as teachers, we go over a topic, and when we do the topic, we do maybe once or twice. We think the kids get it, and then we move on, and then that's it. But when we come back, maybe a couple weeks afterward, we realize that, hey, maybe we needed to do this a little bit more. And formal tone is definitely one of those things with report writing. And that's where we're getting started today with the formal tone. And so at this point, we would have already discussed what formal tone is, some of the things to avoid when we're trying to avoid opinions in reports. We looked at how to start looking at vocabulary and all the different aspects of formal tone and building and maintaining that formal tone, which also include things like the sentence structure and so on. And so today we're going to talk a little bit more about those as we get ready to go into more details on what students need to learn, what they need to cover, and some ways that you could help them with that. But just a little bit about me, if this is your first live, just in case you happen to stumble upon this on YouTube or on Facebook. My name is Shelley Edwards Barron, and I'm a creative writing specialist who also works with comprehension, because reading and writing are pretty much two sides of the same coin in my book. And what we realize when we look at it that way is that when we learn about writing, we're learning what we need to learn to understand the comprehension as well. And I also believe that creative writing and comprehension can be taught through interaction and through lots of investigation and experiments and practical games and all those things. So I follow something called multisensory learning. And that multisensory learning makes these what we consider abstract concepts of comprehension and writing. It makes it a whole lot more tangible and practical for students. And so they're able to really understand it and really get into it. And especially when it comes to narrative writing, I created something called the 12-point plot development that helps students really go into detail with plot and know where to put what to get the plot developed effectively. And I saw in SEA Peacefield Approach, someone had asked what, that's a Facebook group, what, how many sentences, how many lines is appropriate for a narrative paragraph. And I guided them to the conversation we had on narrative paragraphs, which I think would have been like episode 3 or 4, where we're really not looking too much about paragraphing for narratives. We're looking at the plot and then, how to get that done. So those are the kinds of things that I'm really into. I'm also an editor and a writer. And so when I look at writing, even at this level, and reading, I really look at it from multiple perspectives. So if your child is having any kind of challenges with the creative writing, with the comprehension, then you are in the right place. So let me get to it. And today we're dealing with, like I said, we're dealing with report writing first, as I usually do. And we're looking at, let me share screen so that, we can follow along. We're dealing with formal language. And these are the points that I want to mention with the formal language. So why are you? All right. So yeah, every week I have a little challenge with this. Every time I think I'm sharing it properly, it just skips ahead. I don't want it to skip ahead. Let's see if it will behave this time. Yes, it is. Right. There we go. So we're not jumping ahead. keeping language formal. So, what have we done so far? We know what formal tone is, we know what formal language is. We've been doing some activities to really get that into students so that they get into the habit of writing with this formality. Because remember, they don't have that habit, right? I mean, when we speak, the average person does not speak in a formal tone. And when we write, we don't write in a formal tone unless we absolutely have to. And this is something definitely that we need to learn. So, how do we keep it formal? So, we learned how to avoid the opinions, and now we're looking at how to keep it formal. So, let's go back to that slide I had before. This one, so we're looking at proper grammar and syntax is like sentence structure, and we're looking at keeping it objective and impersonal, and we're looking at the sophisticated vocabulary. So for this week, we're really kind of like exploring what it really means to get that formal tone outside of just having the right words. So we know how to avoid the opinions because we looked at how to do that. Now, how do we make it a point of being more intentional about creating and building, maintaining the formal tone? So we're getting into some investigations and a little bit of writing. We really want to get students engaged with this. And so this is kind of like a repetition of what we did when we first looked at what formal tone is. At that point, we were really thinking about just the definition, but now we are going into a lot more details. So again, remember with the schedules that I shared, and if you don't already have a copy of the schedules, there's one for report writing, one for narrative writing, one for comprehension. You could download them. They are on SEA Peacefield Approach. You can also find them on my website. But of course, if you just want to message me to get a copy, feel free. My number, you could WhatsApp me. WhatsApp is always better because I I have my phone with me, and even though I might not be able to answer you, um, I should be able to at least pass on the message to my assistant to get you the details that you need. Right? And so this is my number. So you can WhatsApp me and I'll send you a copy of the schedules if you don't already have one. All right. So it's 717-4993. All right. So yeah, we're getting it's a kind of repeat. So we do a little bit and then we repeat and double check and then we do a little bit, repeat, double check because we really want to go into this kind of cyclical motion so that the repetition and the reinforcement is coming and frequently and it's integrated into what we're studying. So we are going to be looking at each one of these in a lot more detail eventually, starting from next week with the vocabulary and some practical activities and lists of vocabulary and what you can do. But just to review today where it is you're really going to be heading, right? So when it comes to the grammar and the syntax, take a look at these two sentences. So the first one says, he was late to the meeting because he overslept. That is considered informal considering the type of formality that students need to write for a report. And look at the second one, which is the more formal representation. He arrived late to the meeting and indicated that he had overslept. Now, when you look at those two sentences, you'll notice a couple of differences with the grammar, with the sentence construction, and with the vocabulary. Vocabulary, of course, is the more glaring one because we're seeing arrived instead of was late. He arrived late instead of was late. But look at how the sentence is constructed. We have and of course, well, indicated instead of just saying because. If we say because he overslept, that would come across as our opinion. Remember, sneaky opinions, right? We want to say and indicated. When we say indicated, we're introducing the idea that he said so. And once he said it, we heard it, we can say that he said it. That is part of the reporting aspect of reported speech um, and writing reports. And so that introduces something about the reported speech which is an aspect of writing reports and keeping language formal that we really need to make sure students understand. Now, whether or not it is taught, because I know some of these aren't overtly taught at the primary school level. Let's say, for example, this part here as well. So, indicated introduces the idea of reported speech, and had overslept introduces the idea of a different kind of past tense. Now, we are going to be looking at past tense in a little bit more detail, and here is where you want to begin introducing students to the idea that there are different types of past tense. When we say past tense, most times students think of the simple past, where you change the verb, you add the ed, and whether it's a regular, irregular verb, and we have those kinds of ideas, right? But there are actually different kinds of past tense, and many students have been using it, but they're not sure how to use it effectively and when they can introduce it effectively into their own writing. And so for this week, this is one of the things that you would need to introduce to students, that there are different kinds of past tense and they would need to be able to use the different types of past tense. So we want to look at simple past, which they should know. But of course, we're reviewing past tense this week. And we also want to look at past continuous. So was, doing, was, to be plus the ing, in the past. Then we're looking at the perfect tense, what it is and what it looks like. So at this point, we're not testing students, we're just introducing them to the fact that, hey, we've been talking a lot about past tense. Reports are supposed to be written in past tense, but here's what. Do you know that there are, different kinds of past tense? Here's what you need to know. And you give them the information. So they start thinking about it and they start focusing on it. So when it comes to grammar and syntax, we're looking at the different past tense, introducing the um, reported speech kind of thing as well. So these are things that, because there's specific structures for these that students should be aware of. And then when we think about being objective and the um what is the phrase? Let me just check. What was that? So we're looking at objective and impersonal. That's the word I was looking for, impersonal. So here, when it comes to being impersonal, we are introducing the concept of removing the pronouns, removing the speaker from the sentence, removing the subject from the sentence, and creating what we call these indirect sentences, also known as using passive voice. So we are going to be looking at passive voice in more detail, what it is and how to create it, when to use it in a report, but just to know that these are some of the ways that students can actually create that formal tone and keep language formal in reports. So far, we were recognizing that we need to pay attention to the past tense. There are different types, and we can use them each in the writing for different reasons. We also looked at the fact that people say things in reports, and we are going to have to report some of what they said at times. And in fact, that's a really good way to add in information. So we have the reported speech. And then here we have the passive voice, which means that we're removing the pronoun from the sentence and getting a more indirect way of saying things, which is how we are able to keep it objective and impersonal. So we found out that the results were wrong. Yes, we're changing the verbs found out to determined, and we're changing wrong to inaccurate. We do always have that vocabulary issue, but notice we found out turned into it was determined, which means then that we're not identifying who found out. Sometimes in a report, it's not absolutely necessary to do that. And using this kind of passive voice structure really can help keep language formal in reports. And again, we're introducing students to these kinds of things this week. So we're showing them, hey, we might need to use some reported speech. This is what reported speech is. We might need to use some indirect language. And that indirect language is called passive voice, and this is what it looks like. We're also considering the different tenses. Past tense, we have the different levels, and so on. And so we're really showing students some of the background stuff, like the nitty-gritty, the background details about how language is formal and what makes it formal. So remember the first time we introduced this, we're showing generally, keep it polite and etc. etc. Now we're getting into terms and what they mean and what they look like so that students can really see the level of formality required for formal tone. And then we're really paying attention more to the grammar and adjusting to the recognition that writing reports means writing in formal tone, and we're emphasizing the fact that it's not just about the vocabulary. Formal tone has a lot to do with sentence structure and grammar just as much as it has to do with the vocabulary. And so that's the thing that you are reinforcing this week. So remember, we have 3 sessions that we're working with. If you're following the schedule, 30 minutes, and a little bit more. At this point, we might just do 30, 30, 30. But in any case, in the first section, first 30 minutes we're spending this week, we're observing language. So you might want to have a well written, formal tone, structured report, and maybe 2 or 3, and have students go through and say, okay, look at this grammar here. Look at this past tense used here. Look at, this sentence structure used here. Look at the indirect speech and show them what it looks like. That's what we're doing the first session. In the second session, we're paying a little more close attention to the passive voice because that's not something that students are going to be really introduced to. A lot is not going to be really in too many exercise books. So you want to have that specially set aside, do a session on that alone, what exactly it is, what it looks like, how to do it, and 1 or 2 activities. But again, remember, we're not testing at this point. We're really just introducing students to the idea of how reported speech, passive voice, indirect speech, the different tenses, how all of these things work to really create that formal tone. Yes, there's the vocabulary, and in fact, next week we're going to go into vocabulary a little bit more in detail. But for now, we're showing them that, hey, there's more to it than that. Because vocabulary always comes up. And we've, so far, since we've started formal tone, there are lots of words that students should already be accumulating and making their notes. And next week, we would look at a few additional activities that you could use with the students to consistently build that formal vocabulary. Journaling is one for sure, but we'll talk more about that next week. But this week, we're recognizing there is more to formal tone than vocabulary. We mentioned it before, but we're bringing it up again because we really need to get students to recognize that. Because what's going to happen is that many times students focus so much on the vocabulary and getting the right vocabulary word to use that they forget about the different forms of past tense that could also make their language formal and seem more sophisticated. So we want sophisticated grammar, sophisticated sentence structure, and sophisticated vocabulary, not just one or the other. We want all three combined. So we're reviewing well written reports and seeing what works in them, identifying these different aspects, as well as taking a look at maybe you want to give the student a worksheet, give them some sentences. And this is the third session. Give them some sentences that they have to turn into formal language. So give them some informal sentences, have them turn them into formal language, maybe try a paragraph, have them turn the paragraph into a formal paragraph. And we're still spot checking at this point. So we're not necessarily combining everything, but we do want them to see all the different parts of it. All right. So that's what we're working on this week for report writing. Now let's move on to the narrative writing and see what we're working on this week with narratives. So, for narratives, we're looking at escalating conflict. And last week we spoke about rising action and how conflict is related to the rising action, and the fact that you absolutely must have conflict in a report, in a story, if it is you want to fit within the requirements of the narrative writing for SEA, you definitely need to have conflict. And this is something that students can be introduced to very early. I know that standard one and standard two students, when they look at a story, they identify, okay, what is the problem in the story? What is the cause of the problem? What's the effect of the problem? And so that can actually be introduced quite early. At this point, you want to review some of that. You know, what's the problem in the story and how can the problem get worse? And so this week, we're looking at how to make the problem worse. A few strategies for making the problem worse in the story before it gets better. Because that's what kind of makes stories exciting, right? When things get worse before they get better. And certainly, if you want to get rising action, the kind of rising action that you would get for stories that make them really interesting, that's what you want to do this week. You know, take a look at that. So here's what we're looking at in terms of escalating the conflict. So we want to make the conflict worse by probably when the character tries to solve the problem, any attempt to solve the problem actually makes things a little bit worse. Um, and then we always have to consider that cause and effect. And then when things get worse, we have to show the increase in the character's emotional responses. And so the way I describe it to students is like, you know, think of it like you have a tree at different stages. And when you think about how it feels, you know, let's say you want to cut down the first tree, just a few leaves, and you know, it's not very big or strong or anything. You could just cut it. You don't even need an axe or anything like that. Depending on the size of it, you might actually need a scissors, you know, and you know, there goes the tree if it's like really tiny. But then when it starts to get a little bit bigger, then we need a little bit more effort to cut down the tree because at this point, there's a lot more involved. And then finally, when the tree is huge, we need even more effort to cut down the tree. And this is how the character's emotions and reactions need to build as time goes on. But let's take a look at it in terms of like one action, um, you know, attempting to solve the problem, making a worse thing. So let's see. Let's say we're dealing with a child writing after school. This is an example I was using in my class, so this is why it's fresh in my head. So we have a little boy riding his bike after school. What are some of the problems that he could face? He could, let's say, his bike malfunctions and um, the chain is not moving, so he can't ride, so he has to stop. Now, let's say he tries to fix that, and instead of fixing it and getting it back tight, the whole chain falls off and something else breaks in the bike. So that makes things worse. So we started off with a situation where maybe the chain was just loose, but in him trying to fix it, he broke it and the whole chain comes off. And that is an example of how you can have the character trying to respond to a problem and things actually getting way worse. So it's like we started off with the small tree, but instead of getting rid of the tree, we actually gave it food. We added some fertilizer and some water, and now it's an even bigger tree. So we want the efforts of the main character to actually create the bigger problems. So that's one way to do it. It could actually be just having more things happening. So, not that the character is actively doing something to make the problem bigger, like in the case of the boy breaking the bike. Let's say he's riding his bike and he got lost. And in trying to find his way back out, he turns down a street and ends up face to face with a dog that could rush him. So he hasn't actually physically made the problem worse, like in the first instance where he broke the bike, even worse. In this case, he's just taking a turn and ending up in another situation that presents a bigger problem, which would be the dog, because now he could really get hurt. At first, he was just lost. Now he is lost and in danger. And that's how we have a bigger tree where we can actually add things. So in the first one, we're lost. We have a skinny tree with little bit of leaves. And in the second one, now we're lost and in danger. So we have more trees, more leaves, more conflict being added to the original situation. And so those are ways that you can escalate the conflict. And, that can happen again until we get a proper solution and we get to the climax. So the idea is then with escalating the conflict, we want to have attempts to solve the problem, making things worse. And it could make things worse by having the character actively do something that makes it worse, like making a small hole bigger, a small damage bigger, that kind of thing. Or we can have the character just trying to avoid a problem turning into another situation that presents additional problems. So we could add conflict or we could make the same conflict worse itself. And in all of this, we're thinking cause and effect. What is going to cause this thing to get worse? What is going to be the effect? Is the thing getting worse? But then what does that look like? So we also always almost forgot the third one, which is the emotional responses. So it has to feel like it gets worse. So it's not just making it worse as in action and behavior, it also has to feel like it's worse. And that is something that is going to help reinforce and emphasize the escalation of conflict. And how does it feel? So when so let's go back. So small feelings, the chain comes off, is like, oh gosh, this again, mild irritation, jump off the bike, we're gonna fix it, and then clacks, things are broken now. It's like, oh crap, oh boy, oh boy, oh boy, oh boy, now I'm in trouble. And so we want to escalate the conflict. So, he has to go from mild irritation to now either being angry or feeling really sad. We're getting an increase in the problem. And so the feelings have to increase as well. So we're adding more leaves to the tree, if you want to think of it like that. We're adding more leaves to the tree when it comes to feelings as well. And so this week you can do lots of different exercises with this. Always start with conversations and discussions, and then move to practical things that students manipulate with their hands a movement, and then you can go toward the writing. So day one, 30 minutes, I would say, or 30 minutes or less, because you don't have to really go over and over and over. If you finish it in 20 minutes, that's perfectly fine. Because remember, we're coming back, we're doing this cycle of repetition, right? So you might want to start with a few photos. Always great to start with pictures. And you want pictures of characters like doing things, like children doing things. So like maybe photo of a child on a bike riding. You can do that same exercise. Photo of a child eating ice cream. Photo of a child maybe going on vacation with their family. And so we have three situations. You can think of situations that might be relevant to prompts, maybe playing games with friends, whatever the situation is. You could choose three to five, depending on how intense you want to go into the first 30 minutes. I would say three is a good place to start. And just, brainstorm what kinds of problems this person could face, and then brainstorm how that problem could get worse through the actions of the character, and then brainstorm how the character could feel. And so that's your worksheet. So you can create a worksheet with that. You have the photo, and then you have three columns to the worksheet. um what's the brainstorm a list of problems, and then for each problem, let's say you get three problems, and then for each problem, how could that get worse, and then how does the character feel for the first problem, and then when it escalates, how would the character's feelings also escalate. And so we're brainstorming, we can just chat about it. Do the first one completely verbal discussion. The second one, maybe you write it on the board kind of thing. The third one, have the kids write it themselves. And so we're moving from working together, teacher led, peer discussion, and then finally individual, if you want to get it to like that. If you're working with a group, if you're working with just your child, then you and the child discuss, only speaking, then you and the child discuss and write, and then the child alone writes. And so we're moving it toward that direction. That's your first session. And then in the second session, try to do something practical and tangible. And so maybe you want to get um like a graphic that looks like a tree, and you have the different leaves on the tree, and have the child write in. So it doesn't always have to be columns and very rigid structure. You can have the child write it on a slip of paper and stick it onto the tree. So you want to get things very practical and interactive. And even at the standard 4, standard 5 level, students appreciate that kind of work. And if you're dealing with a student who is having challenges keeping focus, who is, feeling like writing is so tedious and boring, and oh, we have to write again, and why all this writing, mixing it up with these kinds of multisensory activities could be really, really good. So just have them write it, what's the problem? And they add, and then this would also help them see visually how things increase. Because when it's in columns and it's on the paper, it's just like there, and um it's just a whole lot of writing. But when you have introduction of the problem, first problem, it's a small tree, so it has to be a small problem. And then we have escalation of conflict. This is a bigger tree with more leaves, so I have to put more stuff on this. And then the biggest tree, even more leaves, I have to put more stuff on this. And then each leaf of the tree, we have the problems. Remember, cause and effect, right? We have the problem, what caused it, what's the effect, how do I feel about it. We can add in emotions on that and kind of flesh it out a little bit. So the leaves on the tree don't only have to be the problem itself, it also would be behavior. So this is a problem. How does the character react? What do they do? What do they say? How do they feel? Leaves on the tree. And so for the first one, we have a smaller problem, bigger one, bigger problems, more conflict added to the first one or not. And then we have this really interesting practical activity that students can engage with. And guess what? They're learning about escalating conflict without even having to feel as if they have all of this writing to do and making it tedious and difficult for them. Just write it down on the do little cutouts of the tree, the leaves, and have them stick it. um Google templates and so on. I haven't created mine yet. I'm working on it. But for now, yeah, just Google it. I'm sure you'd be able to find that on Google and be able to get some leaves cut out and so that they can just write and stick. Get a template of a tree without any leaves and have them stick it in. You could have maybe one or two leaves where you put information already and have them do it. And this is something that is going to be pretty much a lot of fun. And this is what you're doing in the second session. So we introduce them to the ideas, explain to them how to do it. First session. Second session, have them try it on their own, but in a very interesting way. And then by the time you get to the third session, we are looking at maybe what that would look like in an actual narrative. So, third session, we're working with a prompt, a written prompt. So, remember, in the first session, we're working with photos, which would be um, I guess, the prompt, photo prompt. In the last session, we're working with a written prompt because remember, we're trying to move them from the practical visual toward the actual writing that they're going to have to do. Right? And so that's an activity that you can do, fun, interesting activity. Um, and they're learning about escalating conflict, making things worse, making the problems worse just by looking at, adding things to the tree itself. So quite an interesting activity, I think, and I think students would have a lot of fun with it, especially if you're working one-on-one with your own child. Perfect. You can, access printer, do the print, do the thing, cut it out. Takes a little bit of prep, but you would be surprised at how engaged students would be. And so again, if you have a child or you're working with children who are they have trouble focusing, the idea is not to force them to focus by telling them, hey, you need to focus. The idea is to provide activities and interaction that engages their focus that they would want to do these things. And that's how we, keep it like that. And then on the third day as well, when we move to the prompt, you can even try a little quiz or a little worksheet, um, where would you find the biggest problem, those kinds of things, and reintroduce the 12-point plot format or whatever plot format they're using. I hope you're using the 12-point because it's really going to be helpful. Reintroduce that and keep asking questions about that because rising action, conflict interaction, all of that, this is part of the plot. And so we're also looking at maybe think about where you can add in some descriptions, to make the tree look a little bit more full. This is where you can add in some descriptions, character descriptions. We have the behavior, the movement, we can have figurative language, lots of different ways you can explore this and really get students to see how they can escalate the conflict effectively. Even at this point, the manipulatives in writing really do make a difference. All right, so that's your agenda for this week with the narratives, reinforcing the concept of escalating conflict, giving some examples of what that would be, going through the practical activities, and then moving to what the prompt where that's concerned. So, all right, so that is for reports and narratives. So we have that writing clear. We have that sorted out. Let's see. Let's move on now to the comprehension. Right. So for comprehension this week, what we're looking at is the responses that you want for the nonfiction. Now, so far, what we've done with nonfiction, this is week 3 with nonfiction comprehension passages. In week one, what we did was to identify what is nonfiction, what it looks like, what's the purpose of nonfiction. In week two, we analyzed the questions and we looked at how the examiners are asking us questions about what the author wrote. So we're seeing a difference between those three: the reader, which would be the child, the writer of the passage who has some intentions and they're giving information, and then the third person is the examiner who's asking the questions. And so we're recognizing the different kinds of questions, what they look like, what exactly each type of question was asking, and so on. And so for this week, now we're moving on to answering those kinds of questions. So, what are we looking at in terms of answering and answering effectively? So, we want to be as concise as possible. We want to be direct and to the point, and we only want to answer what is asked. So that's why we spent so much time looking at what exactly the question is asking, because we really only want to answer those questions. We don't want to give additional information which may either contradict what we've already said or confuse the examiner to say, wait, did he answer the question? But he's also giving this. Does that mean that he misinterpreted the question or what exactly? So we really want to be careful with only answering what was asked. And so what I want to show you now is I'm going to show you what the 2022 comprehension was, a couple of questions from there, and I'm going to show you the responses from the past paper solutions that I have. I'm going to show you just three, just to give you an idea of what kind of thing that you should be working with. All right, let me see. How do I get the two? Yeah, let's see. Maybe if I do that, yeah, I can get it so you can see both side by side. It might be a little bit tiny, but I'm going to read it and I'll explain what I'm going for. So in my answer sheets, when I give the answers to the questions, I also give a little bit of explanation. So I show you what the recommended answer is, and then I explain how that recommended answer works and where you can find it sometimes and different things. So question 19 says, identify two words or phrases which the author uses to describe electric vehicles in paragraph 1. You get 2 marks for this. So it's pretty much 1 mark per word because you have to identify two. And so now we're looking at how to answer it. Now, this particular one has just like 3 lines, and so it suggests that you would answer in a complete sentence. Um, we also have in the newer format where you have like with question 22 where you have benefit 1, benefit 2. In a question like this, 2 words and phrases, you might actually see like phrase 1, phrase 2, or word slash phrase 1, word slash phrase 2. Sometimes it's done like that, but in this case we're answering in a sentence, right? In paragraph 1, the author uses the word stylish and the phrase fit for the road to describe electric vehicles. Now, we're only identifying. So there are additional answers, but in this case, we're really only identifying. We are not explaining what those words mean. We're only identifying. So when we see the word identify, it means really only to answer, so additional, so possible other answers. And then this is a literal question. So when you see literal question, it means no further explanation required. And the answers are found in the text. So we're not explaining. So there are no explanations. We're only giving what the text says in the answer. And then, so number 20, what is the main idea of paragraph 3? The main idea of paragraph 3 is that although there are concerns about electric vehicles, there are many benefits. So this one is kind of like putting it in my own words. Main ideas are often found in the sentence, in the first sentence of nonfiction texts. So if we're looking at paragraph 3, we go to paragraph 3, first sentence, and we're likely to find it there. If a student just literally copies exactly what that sentence says, once it has the main idea, then that's okay, because guess what? This is 1 mark. So again, no further explanation needed. We're just stating the main idea. And then number 21, where we have give the meaning. Um, what is the meaning? Dominates means leads, controls, or waived. You could be overlooked or disregarded. So we really want to have the just exact answers. So notice there's no like sentence explanation. Um, the word dominates means da da da. The word waived means it's not absolutely necessary when you have the responses shown like this, where you just put a short line to give the exact answer. So you really want to give the exact answer and as directly as possible. So I hope that sort of clarifies what I mean by, just being concise, being precise, and giving the exact answer, not anything extra. Because when you're looking at the marks, I mean, you're going through this. This is the first of 3 comprehension that you have to do. Comprehension texts. There's the passage, there's the poem, and then there's the graphic. So you don't really want to take too much time going through this. Really just directly to the point, give the exact answer, and move on. So at this point, students should have already explored what the questions are asking, so they understand what the questions are asking. This week, you're looking at how to respond to those questions as precisely and effectively as possible, right? So, um, model answers first. So if you don't already have a copy of the past paper responses and you want to see what those look like, you can let me know. WhatsApp me 7174993. Cost is 150, and for that 150, you get from 2019 all the way to 2024. So I've included 2024. The only thing with 2024 is that the copy of the exam that's circulating is missing the last question for the graphics. But what I did was to give 3 possible questions that could come and suggested answers for each of those 3. So it's complete, except that the exact question that came is not included, but you do get suggested questions and so on. And so you can go through those and look at what the answers look like, and you can go through those with the child and discuss, the fact that you notice that this goes direct, it goes to the point, it's not giving any more details. Why do you think that is? And really get into that understanding of this is how questions are supposed to be answered. So do that first session. Again, we're going with 3 sessions, just like with the narratives and the reports. First session, maybe go through one of the past papers and what the answers would look like, discuss the answers, and then session 2, um, do some creation where you answer the questions and discuss how you came up with the answers to the questions. And then session 3, maybe give the child a few questions to respond to, and then we're discussing how the answers match as well as how they respond effectively to the questions. And so that's what you want to work on this week with the students, really focusing on answering the questions and keeping the answers short to the point. You might have to discuss what it means to summarize and to give, what is a phrase and so on, just to make sure that the student understands how to do these things. All right. So the past paper responses, it's a starting point. You can get your copy if you don't already have one and use that as your way to focus on the nonfiction and nonfiction responses. And of course, over the years, there are actually three. I think this would be like in the 6 years, yeah. There are fiction passages. So when we move on to fiction, you would have already have gotten the past papers, so you can use those, focus on fiction. Then when we're doing poetry, you can focus on the poetry. When we're doing the graphics, you have the graphics already there that you could work with. So it's really a good idea, at least to have that prepared, get different perspectives with a bit of explanations, and see how that goes. So that is it for our session today. I think we have covered the reports, we have covered narratives, and we're looking at these are the three areas that we're really focusing on this week. Um, every single time I go to share screen, okay, I don't know why it's set like this, but all right, and let's go share and see how it goes. Does it move? No. All right. Yeah. Sorry about that. It gets so distracting when the tech doesn't work the way you want it to go. But all right, so this is what we covered this week. So, formality, keeping language formal, and we're looking at introducing students to the idea of different types of past tense, the reported speech, and the passive voice. That's what we're introducing them to this week. Escalating conflict, we're introducing students to the fact of having their response to a conflict create the next conflict, or putting the character in the position of, you know additional conflict coming on. And then for nonfiction responses, we're looking at, being precise, being exact, and really looking at the responses that match what is required, as opposed to just really giving general any idea kind of thing. And, as I'm looking at this, I realize this is episode 6. I think in the intro, I forgot to change that. So it says episode 5. But yeah, this is episode 6. All right. So there you have it. You have your agenda for the week. You know what you're doing. You know how to cover it. If you need any assistance with anything, please feel free to let me know. WhatsApp number 717-4993. And let's look forward to an awesome week revising. And once you keep at it, keep working on these things little by little. It might seem as if we're starting very, very tiny, but there's a purpose behind this, the repetition and the foundations, because this is what the rest of everything else, when you start to put things together, this is what it's built on. All right. So have a wonderful rest of the day today. And I look forward to seeing you next week with another episode of Journey to SEA 2025. All right. Bye, everybody.